They assaulted a human diplomat, unaware they'd just awakened humanity's wrath. Part 1, The Hand Extended in Peace. Carol Simmons had been on ships her whole career, but the Galactic Concord Station was something different. It was not a ship. It was a world unto itself, hanging in orbit above a dim orange star that no single species could claim as their own. The station was wide and long and full of noise and color, and it smelled of 100 different atmospheres all mixed together into something that burned the back of the throat if you breathed too deep. Carol had been warned about that. She had packed small filters in her coat pocket and used them when the smell got bad. She walked through the main corridor with 2 aides behind her. One was a young man named Pete Larkin, fresh out of the diplomatic corps and still wide-eyed at everything. The other was a woman named Dana Cole, who had been doing this work for 12 years and wore the calm face of someone who had seen most things already. Carol trusted Dana more than almost anyone. Dana carried the charter in a flat sealed case and never let it out of her hand. The charter was the reason they had come. Earth had spent 3 years working on it, passing it through committees and review boards and legal teams, and finally through the office of the Secretary General herself. It was a peace agreement between humanity and the Drath sovereignty, a species that had been pushing into systems near the edge of human-mapped space for the better part of a decade. The Drath had never directly attacked a human vessel, but they had come close enough that people back home were starting to ask questions. The charter was meant to draw a clear line and put both sides on record as agreeing to it. Carol believed in the charter. She believed in what it represented. She had helped write parts of it herself, and she knew every clause by memory. The assembly hall of the Concord was large enough to hold the delegations of 41 species all at once. The seating was arranged in a wide circle, with a central floor where representatives stood to speak. The ceiling was transparent, and through it you could see the stars. Carol had read that the design was intentional. Whoever built the station wanted the species inside it to remember that the galaxy was bigger than any argument they were having. The Drath delegation was already seated when Carol arrived. She saw them across the hall and felt the air change slightly. The Drath were tall, scaled from the neck down, with flat wide faces and eyes that reflected light like polished stone. Their ambassador was a figure called Grakvel, and Carol had read everything on record about him. He was not a diplomat in any traditional sense. He was a warlord who had been given a diplomatic title because the Drath sovereignty believed that strength was the only language worth speaking. Carol walked to the center floor. Pete and Dana took their seats at the human section. Carol stood alone and introduced herself to the assembly in standard Concord speech, which she had practiced until it came naturally. She gave her full name and her title and the name of the government she represented. Then she stated clearly and simply that Earth had come to offer peace. The hall was quiet for a moment. A few alien delegates made small sounds of acknowledgement. Some shifted in their seats. The Velhari elder at the far end of the room gave her a slow, respectful nod. Grakvel did not move. Carol turned to face the Drath section directly and addressed him by name. She said that Earth had no interest in conflict and that the charter in the hands of her aide represented a genuine offer from the people of humanity to the people of the Drath sovereignty. She said the terms were fair. She said both sides had things to gain. Grakvel stood. He was almost a full head taller than any human in the room, and the 4 guards around him moved when he moved, like a tide following the pull of something heavy. He did not speak to Carol. He spoke to the hall. He said, in a voice that carried easily to every corner, that the Drath sovereignty did not negotiate with species that sent soft-voiced females to beg for agreements they had no power to enforce. He said humanity was not a real power and that the charter was an insult dressed up in formal language. Carol kept her expression steady. She had expected something like this. She started to respond. She did not get the chance. Grakvel gave a short gesture with one hand and 2 of his guards moved from their positions with a speed that caught the hall completely off guard. They crossed the central floor in seconds. One of them grabbed Carol by the arm and the other struck her across the side of the head before she could raise a hand to stop it. The blow was hard enough to send her sideways. She hit the floor and the room exploded into noise. Pete was on his feet immediately, but a 3rd Drath guard blocked his path with a wall of scaled body and did not move. Dana stood and held the charter case against her chest and watched with wide, stunned eyes. Carol tried to push herself up and a boot came down on her shoulder and drove her flat again. She felt something crack. The pain came a second later, sharp and white. The hall was shouting. Several delegates were standing. The Concorde security officers were moving toward the floor but slowly, too slowly, caught off guard like everyone else and uncertain whether to intervene in what was technically a diplomatic confrontation. Grackvel walked to the edge of the central floor and looked down at Carol. He said, calmly and clearly enough for every translator in the room to carry it perfectly, that Earth's petition was rejected. He said that the next human vessel that entered Drath-claimed space would be treated as a military threat and handled accordingly. He said humanity should go home and learn its place. Then he turned and walked back to his section and sat down, and his guards followed him, and the hall fell into a stunned and horrible silence. Carol lay on the floor of the assembly hall of the Galactic Concorde station with her shoulder broken and blood on the side of her face and 41 alien delegations watching her from their seats. None of them moved to help her for a long moment. Some of them looked away. A few of the smaller species seemed to shrink into their chairs. Pete finally broke through and got to her side. Dana was right behind him. Together they got Carol up off the floor and helped her toward the doors. She did not make a sound the whole way. The Concorde's medical bay was 2 levels down. They got her there in less than 4 minutes. A Velhari aide named Seuss held the door open for them with both hands and watched Carol's face with something that looked very much like shame, even though the Drath were not his people. When they had Carol on the medical table and the human medic on staff had started working on her shoulder, Pete sat down on a bench by the wall and stared at the ceiling. Dana set the charter case on the floor beside her feet and did not let go of the handle. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Seuss, who was still standing near the door, cleared his throat quietly. He said he thought someone should send a message to Earth. He said it in a small voice, the way someone speaks when they already know that what they are about to do will change things, and they are not sure the change will be peaceful. Dana looked at him. Then she looked at Pete. Then she picked up her communicator and began typing the transmission. Outside, through the station's hull, the stars were completely still. They assaulted a human diplomat, unaware they'd just awakened humanity's wrath. Part 2, the signal that changed everything. The transmission arrived at Earth Defense Command at 0312 hours, station-adjusted time. It came in on a standard diplomatic frequency, flagged urgent by the sending terminal, and it was routed automatically to the overnight watch officer, a lieutenant named Carl Webb, who read it once and then read it again and then picked up his desk terminal and called his superior without waiting for a decent hour. The message was not long. It did not need to be. It said that human diplomat Carol Simmons had been physically assaulted on the floor of the Galactic Concorde Assembly Hall by members of the Drath Diplomatic Guard, that she had suffered a broken shoulder and head trauma, and that the attack had been carried out openly in front of the full assembled delegations of 41 species. It said the Drath ambassador, Grackvel, had ordered the attack personally and had rejected the peace charter verbally before walking back to his seat. At the bottom of the transmission, in plain text, was a single line that had been added by the Velhari aide who helped send it. It said, "I am sorry. I do not think anyone here will act on this. I thought someone should know." Carl Webb forwarded the full message up the chain at 0314 hours. By 0340 hours, it was on the desk of Admiral George Patton. George Patton was 63 years old and had spent 38 of those years in the Earth Defense Command. He had gray hair, a flat face that rarely showed much, and the particular kind of stillness that came from decades of making large decisions in quiet rooms. He read the message at his desk in his personal quarters, still in his night clothes, with a cup of cold coffee at his elbow. He read it all the way through without stopping. Then he set the terminal down on the desk and sat back in his chair and looked at the wall for almost 2 full minutes. Then he stood up, got dressed, and went to the command floor. The staff on the overnight watch went straight when he walked in. He told them to sit down and carry on and went to his station at the head of the room. He pulled up the full file on the Concorde incident, cross-referenced it with current Drath fleet positions and the most recent intelligence reports, and spent 20 minutes reading in silence. No one spoke to him unless he asked a direct question. At 0410 hours, he began issuing orders. The orders were calm. They were precise. They did not use strong language or dramatic phrasing, because George Patton did not work that way. He was the kind of man who believed that if a thing needed to be done, the best way to talk about it was briefly and clearly. He issued fleet mobilization codes to 17 Earth defense outposts spread across human-mapped space. He authorized the activation of vessels that had been in reserve status for between 2 and 6 years. He sent sealed command packets to 14 captains whose ships were already at full readiness. He requested a full inventory update from the logistics division within the hour. By the time the sun came up over the command center's eastern windows, the machinery had already started moving. What the Galactic Concord did not know, what almost no species outside of humanity knew, was that Earth had not spent the last 40 years simply building diplomatic offices and sending representatives to negotiating tables. Earth had been doing that, yes. But it had also been building ships. Not the small patrol vessels and escort craft that it registered with the Concord under the standard military disclosure agreements. Those ships were real and they were capable, but they were not the whole picture. They were the hand that was shown at the table. The rest was kept somewhere the table could not see. The full Earth defense fleet was not a secret in the dramatic sense. It was simply something Earth had never been asked to prove. No species had ever pushed hard enough or long enough to make the question unavoidable. The draft had come close, a few times, in a few contested systems, but they had always stopped just short of the line that would have forced humanity to answer the question formally. On this day, Grakvel had crossed that line. He had crossed it in the most public way imaginable, in front of the entire diplomatic community of the known galaxy, and he had done it to a human woman who had come carrying a peace offering with both hands open. George Patton did not say any of this out loud. He did not make speeches to his staff or send motivational messages to the fleet. He simply sent orders. The orders said where to go and when to arrive and what formation to hold, and the people receiving them understood the rest on their own. Back on the Concord station, Grakvel was hosting a private dinner in the draft delegation suite. The table was set with food brought from the draft homeworld, and the room was loud with celebration. His guards sat along the walls and the political staff sat around the table, and Grakvel sat at the head of it all and told the story of the morning in great detail. He made it funny in parts. His staff laughed in the right places. He told them that humanity had shown today what it truly was, a species with good manners and no spine, too soft to fight and too proud to simply stay out of draft business. He said it was done now. He said Earth would think carefully before sending another diplomat, and the next time they came, they would come properly, meaning they would come already accepting draft terms. He said the Concord Charter was dead and that was the right outcome for everyone. No one at the table mentioned the transmission that had been sent to Earth. No one at the table knew about it. Seuss had been very quiet when he helped send it, and the draft had not been watching the Velhari aide in the corner. In the medical bay, Carol Simmons lay with her arm in a brace and a bandage along the right side of her face. The medic had given her something for the pain and she was mostly awake, staring at the ceiling in a calm and private way. Pete Larkin was asleep in the chair beside her bed. Dana Cole was not in the room. Dana had gone to send a second transmission of her own, a personal one to a contact at the Secretary General's office, because Dana did not fully trust that the first one had gone where it needed to go. Seuss came to the medical bay in the late afternoon. He stood near the door for a moment, not sure if he was welcome. Carol saw him and nodded once. He came in and sat down on a chair near the wall and said nothing for a while. Then he said, quietly, that he was sorry for what had happened and that it should not have been allowed to go that far. Carol looked at him. She said she was not angry at him. She said she knew he had nothing to do with it. She said she appreciated that he helped send the message. Seuss said he hoped the message helped. Carol said she thought it would. She did not say anything more than that. But there was something in her voice that was not uncertainty, and Seuss, who was good at reading people even across species lines, felt something shift in the room. He was not sure what it was, exactly. It felt a little like standing near a window when the weather outside is about to change, the kind of feeling you get just before the wind picks up. He thanked her and left. Out past the edge of the station's sensor range, moving at speeds the Concorde's passive detectors were not calibrated to catch, 17 jump points opened and closed in rapid sequence. And the fleet began to move, they assaulted a human diplomat, unaware they'd just awakened humanity's wrath. Part 3, the fleet nobody knew existed. The Concorde station's long-range sensor array was not designed for war. It had been built to track civilian traffic, manage docking schedules, and give the station's administrators early warning of anything unusual coming in from the outer lanes. It was good at those things. It was not built for what it detected at 0617 hours, 2 days after the incident in the assembly hall. The first operator to see it was a young Velhari technician named Ovas, who spent a few seconds assuming his equipment was malfunctioning. He tapped the screen. He ran a diagnostic. He looked at the numbers again. Then he called his supervisor, and his supervisor looked at the same screen, and the room got very quiet. The contacts were human. The transponder signatures were unmistakable, Earth defense markings on every single one, broadcasting clearly and openly, which meant whoever was coming was not trying to hide. What made Ovas feel cold in a way he could not explain was the number. Not 2 ships. Not 5. The sensor array was showing carriers, destroyers, long-range artillery platforms, rapid assault craft, and support vessels moving in a coordinated formation that no one on the station had ever seen in person, only in historical files from species that had fought wars large enough to require a formation that size. The station commander, a senior Brecken official named Taurus, was pulled out of a meeting and brought to the sensor room. He looked at the display for a long time without speaking. Then he asked the technicians to run the count again. They ran it again. The number did not change. By the time the fleet dropped to sublight speed and entered the station's visible range, every delegation on the Concorde station was watching through whatever screen or viewport they could find. The ships came in slowly and with perfect order. They were not rushing. They were not making threatening movements. They were simply arriving, the way a thing arrives when it has decided to arrive and sees no reason to hurry. The human vessels were clean and gray and enormous. The carriers were the size of small moons compared to the patrol ships the Concorde had seen from Earth before. Their hull markings read Earth Defense Command, and the formation held its shape with a discipline that made more than one alien officer watching from the station quietly reassess every assumption they had been carrying about humanity for years. Admiral George Patton opened a single channel to Concorde station from the lead ship. His voice was level and clear, and it came through on the standard frequency without any dramatic build-up. He introduced himself by name and rank. He said that Earth had received a full report of what had occurred in the assembly hall. He said that humanity had not come to destroy the station or to threaten the Concorde Council. He said Earth had come for a straightforward reason. One of its diplomats had been beaten on the floor of a neutral ground assembly by a foreign military guard, in full view of the galactic community, and that could not go unanswered. He made 3 requests. The first was the immediate transfer of Grakvel and the guards who had carried out the attack into human custody. The second was a formal apology from the Drath sovereignty, delivered on the floor of the assembly hall in front of the full Concorde. The third was complete medical and legal restitution for Carol Simmons. He gave the station 6 hours to respond. He said the channel would remain open. Then he stopped talking. In the assembly hall, the silence that followed was total. Delegates sat in their seats and looked at each other and then looked at the view screens showing the human fleet hanging outside and then looked back at each other again. The Velhari elder who had nodded at Carol 2 days ago sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him and said nothing for a long time. The Brecken delegate, a species widely considered one of the 3 major military powers in the Concorde, pulled up his own fleet comparison files quietly under the table and studied them with an expression that his staff had never seen on him before. The Drath section was very still. Grakvel sat in his chair with both hands flat on the desk and his jaw tight. His political staff were quiet. His guards, who had been so fast and confident 2 days ago, were standing with their posture slightly different than before, not afraid, exactly, but recalibrated, the way a predator looks when it suddenly realizes the thing it stepped on might not be what it thought. In the medical bay, Dana Cole came in fast and turned on the wall screen and woke Pete up with a hand on his shoulder. Carol was already awake. She pushed herself upright against the pillow and watched the screen as the footage from the external cameras was broadcast station-wide. Nobody had to explain to her what she was seeing. She recognized the ship markings without help. She had grown up near a defense command base in the south of the country and she had spent her childhood watching ships like that lift off on clear mornings. She watched the fleet hold its formation in total silence and felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was tight. Pete said, very quietly, that he had not known there were that many of them. Dana said nobody was supposed to know. On the command deck of the lead vessel, George Patton stood with his hands behind his back and watched the station on the forward screen. A young officer at the navigation console, a woman named Louise Grant, was tracking the sensor returns from the station and marking the positions of every draft vessel in the area. There were 6 draft ships within range. All 6 had gone to full stop the moment the human fleet appeared. None of them had raised weapons. None of them had moved. George had expected that. The draft were many things, but they were not stupid enough to fire on a formation of this size without a direct order, and Grackville was on the station, not commanding one of those ships. The draft captains out there were doing the same math everyone else was doing, and the math was not going in Grackville's favor. A communications officer named Roy Dunn reported that 17 other Concorde member species had sent quiet acknowledgement pings on private channels. No messages, just pings. George knew what that meant. It meant they were watching and they wanted Earth to know they were watching, because they had already decided which side of this they were standing on. One of those pings came from a Velhari frequency. George noted it and said nothing. He looked at the time on the command display. 6 hours. That was what he had given them. He was not impatient. He had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing a person could do in a confrontation was simply wait without moving, because the other side would fill the silence with everything they were afraid of. Outside the view screen, the fleet held its shape against the stars. Nobody moved. The 6 hours had only just begun. They assaulted a human diplomat, unaware they'd just awakened humanity's wrath. Part 4, the weight of consequence. At the 4-hour mark, Grackville sent a response. It was not an apology. It was not a negotiation offer. It came through on the open Concorde channel, meaning every delegation on the station heard it at the same moment George Patton heard it, and that was clearly intentional. Grackville wanted an audience. The message said that the draft sovereignty did not recognize Earth's right to demand anything from a duly authorized draft diplomatic representative. It said that what had occurred in the assembly hall was an internal draft matter related to the handling of an unauthorized approach to a senior draft official. It said that the human fleet's presence in the neutral zone around Concorde Station was itself a violation of Concorde Protocol, and that Earth was the party behaving unlawfully. It ended by saying that if the human fleet did not withdraw within 2 hours, the draft sovereignty would treat its continued presence as an act of war. And then, in a final line that was clearly meant to land in front of every watching species, Grackville said that he challenged Earth to fire the first shot. The challenge was calculated. Grackville knew the Concorde would record everything. He knew that if Earth fired on the station, or even fired in the direction of the station, the galactic community would have grounds to condemn humanity regardless of what had come before. He was betting that George Patton would hesitate. He was betting that the humans, who had come so far and brought so many ships, would ultimately not be willing to pull the trigger in front of everyone. George Patton read the message once. He set it down. He looked at Louise Grant and told her to pull up the tactical map of the draft sovereignty's outer supply infrastructure. Louise did it in 40 seconds and put it on the main screen. George studied the map for a moment. Then he pointed to a marked position 2-star systems from the station, a large draft military supply depot that serviced the 6 draft vessels currently sitting in neutral space. It was a significant facility. It held fuel reserves, weapons stockpiles, and the maintenance infrastructure for a full draft patrol wing. It was also, critically, unmanned on its outer defensive ring because the draft had never expected anyone to come at it from the direction it could be reached from. George told Roy Dunn to open a private channel to Captain Alan Morse on the heavy strike carrier positioned at the rear of the formation. He gave Alan Morse a precise set of coordinates, a target window of 90 seconds, and a single instruction: clean strike, no station debris, no civilian infrastructure. Then he closed the channel and waited. 47 seconds later, a small group of long-range strike craft detached from the carrier and were gone before any of the watching ships had time to track them properly. They did not fly toward the station. They did not fly toward the draft ships in the neutral zone. They jumped, held their jump for less than 4 minutes, and arrived over the supply depot on the exact targeting solution Alan Morse had calculated. The strike lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, the depot's fuel reserves were gone, the weapons stockpiles were disabled, and the outer defensive ring was so much floating metal. No crew had been aboard the outer ring. The draft personnel in the interior sections had been given 30 seconds of warning through an automated emergency broadcast before the strike hit, which was exactly enough time to reach the emergency shelters. There were no fatalities. The sensor return came back to the station 12 minutes later. Roy Dunn put it on the main screen without being asked. The assembly hall went absolutely silent. Grackvel stared at the screen. The depot that had been on that map 2 minutes ago was not on the map anymore in any meaningful sense. It was debris. It had not fought back. It had not seen the strike coming. It had simply ceased to exist as a functioning military installation between one breath and the next. One of the draft political staff said something in their own language that the translators did not catch. One of the guards near the door made a sound that was not words. George Patton reopened the Concorde-wide channel. He said, in the same level voice he had used from the beginning, that Earth had not fired on the station and had not fired on a single draft vessel in neutral space. He said Earth had responded to a military threat with a military response on a legitimate military target. He said 2 hours had not passed since Grackvel's message, which meant Earth had not violated even the timeline Grackvel had set. He said the original 3 requests were still on the table and the remaining time on his original 6-hour window was still running. Then he closed the channel again. In the assembly hall, the Brecon delegate quietly closed the fleet comparison file he had been looking at. He did not need to look at it anymore. The numbers were not the most important thing anyway. The most important thing was what had just happened. A species that everyone had assumed was soft had reached 2 star systems away and turned a military asset into scrap metal without hesitation, without anger, and without a single wasted word. 2 minor species delegations, the Yesi and the Parath, both of whom had openly mocked human diplomatic culture in past sessions, sent private messages to their governments within the hour. Both messages said approximately the same thing: open contact with Earth as soon as possible and do not say anything negative about them in the interim. The 6 draft ships in the neutral zone still had not moved. Their captains had been in contact with each other on closed frequencies since Grackvel's first message, and those conversations had changed character significantly after the depot strike. None of them were thinking about weapons anymore. They were thinking about whether their commander on the station had any idea what he had started. In the medical bay, a young Marine named Eddie Cole was standing guard outside Carroll's door. He was 24 years old and this was his first assignment outside of Earth. He had been listening to the updates through his earpiece and had been keeping his expression as professional as he could manage, but when the depot strike report came in, he let out a slow breath and allowed himself a small, quiet look of satisfaction that he did not think anyone could see. Carroll could see it. She was a diplomat and she had spent 20 years reading faces. She asked him if he was relieved. He said, carefully, that he was just doing his job. She said that was a good answer. She looked back at the wall screen and watched the debris field on the sensor readout slowly spreading in the space where the depot had been. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired in a way that went down to her bones. But somewhere under the tiredness there was something else, a solid, quiet thing that held its shape the way a good foundation holds a building up. She knew what that feeling was. She had felt it before, on smaller scales, in smaller rooms. It was the feeling of knowing that the people behind you were not going to leave you on the floor. The remaining time on the 6-hour clock ticked downward. And Grackvel, for the first time in his life, sat in silence and did not know what to say. They assaulted a human diplomat, unaware they'd just awakened humanity's wrath. Part 5, What Humanity Leaves Behind. With 40 minutes remaining on the clock, the draft sovereignty broke. It did not come from Grackvel. It came from above him. The draft high speaker, the highest political authority in the sovereignty, sent a direct transmission to Concorde Station from the draft homeworld. The transmission was addressed to Admiral George Patton and to the full Concorde Council simultaneously, and it did not open with conditions or negotiations. It opened with a statement that the actions of Grackvel and his guards had not been authorized by the draft sovereignty leadership and that the sovereignty formally disavowed the attack on the human diplomat. Then it said that Grackvel and the guards responsible for the assault would be remanded to human custody within the hour. Then it said that the High Speaker would personally deliver a formal apology to the Concorde Assembly at a time of the Council's choosing. The transmission ended there. George Patton read it, acknowledged receipt with a single short reply, and told Roy Dunn to send a docking authorization to the draft section for the transfer. He did not make a statement to the fleet. He did not make a speech. He simply moved to the next step the way someone moves through a task list, without drama, without celebration, with the steady focus of someone who is not finished yet. Within 50 minutes, Grakvel was escorted off the station by 2 of his own political staff and 4 human marines in full armor. He walked through the main corridor in a silence that felt different from his silence in the assembly hall 2 days before. In the hall he had been silent by choice, from power. Now the silence came from somewhere else. He did not look at the alien delegates watching from the corridor edges as he passed. He looked straight ahead and kept moving, and the only sound around him was the boots of the Marines and the low hum of the station's ventilation. The guards who had carried out the attack followed behind him under separate escort. They were not restrained in any dramatic way. They were simply surrounded and guided, and they went without resistance, because there was nothing left around them that made resistance feel like a reasonable option. Carol Simmons was helped from the medical bay to the assembly hall by Eddie Cole, who walked beside her at a careful pace and said nothing unless she needed something. Her arm was still in the brace. The bandage along her face had been replaced with a smaller one. She moved a little stiffly, but she moved under her own power, and that was important to her. Dana Cole and Pete Larkin were already seated in the human section when she arrived. Pete looked like he had not slept in 2 days, which was accurate. Dana looked exactly the same as she always looked, which was also accurate. Carol sat down. She put the sealed charter case on the table in front of her. She had asked Dana to bring it. No one had asked her to bring it. She had decided on her own. The Drath High Speaker's apology came through as a live transmission on the main screen at the head of the assembly hall. The hall was full. Every delegation was in their seats. The Concorde's recording systems were running, which meant this would be in the permanent record of the galactic community for as long as the Concorde kept records. The High Speaker appeared on the screen. He was old, with deep-set eyes and a face that showed the weight of what he was doing. He spoke in formal Drath, which the translators carried in real time. He said that the Drath sovereignty had failed its own stated values of honorable conduct. He said that the assault on Carol Simmons was a disgrace and had no justification under any law or tradition the sovereignty recognized. He said that the sovereignty accepted full responsibility and would fulfill whatever terms of restitution Earth set. He said it clearly and without deflection. The hall was completely quiet while he spoke. When the transmission ended, the Velhari elder placed his hands flat on the table and bowed his head slightly, the way his species showed that they had witnessed something they believed mattered. George Patton's voice came through the council speakers a moment later. He said Earth accepted the apology. He said the terms of restitution would be communicated through proper diplomatic channels. He said the fleet would begin its withdrawal immediately. He thanked the Concorde Council for their patience and wished the station's delegates well. Then the channel closed. Through the assembly hall's transparent ceiling, the delegates watched as the human fleet began its withdrawal. The ships moved in the same orderly formation they had arrived in, pulling back from the station slowly and then accelerating outward in a clean and controlled pattern. The carriers went last. They turned as one, their hulls reflecting the light of the distant orange star, and then they were gone, back into the jump lanes, back into the space between stars, back to wherever they had come from. The station felt different when they were gone. Not safer. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that a room has after something large has passed through it. Eddie Cole walked Carol back toward the medical bay because the medic had told her not to be on her feet too long. They went through the side corridors, away from the main hall, where it was less busy. Carol walked slowly and Eddie matched her pace without being asked. After a while, Eddie said he was glad she was all right. Carol said she was glad too. Eddie said, after a pause, that he had read her file before the assignment. He said she had been doing this work for a long time. Carol said she had. She said it was good work, usually. She said most of the time people wanted to talk, and talking was better than what had happened 2 days ago. She said she still believed that. Eddie nodded. He did not disagree. In the Drath section of the station, the remaining political staff were packing quietly. The Drath High Speaker had recalled the full delegation pending a formal review of the sovereignty's Concorde conduct. The Drath ships in the neutral zone had already departed. The sovereignty would face months of internal political crisis over what Grakvel had done, and several of the border agreements it had been relying on with neighboring species were already showing signs of coming apart. In the days that followed, the Concord received 14 formal requests for new diplomatic contact with Earth. 5 of them came from species that had never initiated contact before. 3 of them came from species whose delegates had been present in the hall when Carol was attacked and had not moved to help. Carol noted that. She was not bitter about it. She was a diplomat, and diplomats dealt with things as they were. But she noted it. Seuss found her on the last day before the human delegation departed. He came to the docking bay and waited near the edge, uncertain again, the same way he had been uncertain at the door of the medical bay. Carol saw him and crossed over. He said he hoped things would be better from here. She said she thought they would be. She said the galaxy had just learned something about humanity, and in her experience, things learned the hard way tended to stick. He asked her if she was going to try again with the charter. She picked up the sealed case she was carrying and looked at it for a moment. Then she said yes. She said the charter was still a good idea. She said a thing being hard to do did not make it the wrong thing to do. Seuss nodded. He said he agreed. Carol shook his hand, the way humans do, and he accepted it in the way his species did, holding it for a moment with both of his, which among the Velhari meant something close to respect between equals. Then she went through the docking bay doors and the ship took her home. And in the halls of the Galactic Concord station, for a very long time after that, the name Earth was spoken differently.